Origin gents, this is Maduro's arrest isn't about oil. It's about China by General Ryan Macbeth. Damn, that's some Shakespearean name. Yeah, alright. This is a big channel, a million subscribers. Holy shit, look at those, look at that interior. I didn't even notice that. Alright. So I guess he's gonna talk about here. Obviously, not everybody, most people, probably liberal media, is saying it's about oil, right? It just makes sense that it's about oil, and I think it is about oil at some level. But it's also about China. That also kind of makes sense to me, but we'll see in detail what he's talking about here. But yeah, I think it's mostly about like Monroe Doctrine, right? It's about like China not getting influence or something. Let's watch this one.
On January 3rd, 2026, the United States conducted strikes in Venezuela under Operation Absolute Resolve, and Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were captured. Multiple outlets are reporting that Maduro was moved to USS custody on the USS Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship, and he's expected to face charges in Manhattan federal court.
For what?
I believe he just arrived in New York City. That's the headline. Now, here's the important part. This story is still developing. The first 24, 72 hours are going to be full of conflicting claims and propaganda and hot takes. The bot farms are going crazy right now on Reddit and on Twitter saying this was illegal. Now, I am not a lawyer, but there has been an indictment active against Maduro for, I think, about 6 years now. So let's do a short briefing. I'll tell you what I think this is actually about. First off, this raid was fast. And if you want to see a fast raid, get my novels, The Last Republic, Lies to Rule Men and The Last Republic, available on Amazon and on Audible. If you're a Marine, you can get my Intel Life sweatshirt or bunker branding as well. U.S. forces struck targets around Caracas and other sites, and parts of Caracas reportedly lost power during the operation. Don't know whether that was due to a cyber attack or due to kinetic effects. Maduro and Flores were captured. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez went on state TV calling it a kidnapping, demanding their release. She might want to get on the next plane to Russia once one becomes available. Reuters reports that the UN Security Council is due to meet over the action. The U.S. is publicly framing this as a law enforcement or counter-narco-terrorism action tied to this New York indictment and terror group drug network claims.
See, two things can be true. Like I've said in one of my previous reactions, people obviously, look man, as an American, this is legal action. Probably from Venezuelan perspective, not the civilian perspective, they're happy. But you can see this as kidnapping because FBI is legal in USA. American things are American things. They don't really apply in another country, right? So you can't really say this was legal. Legal in which way, right? Venezuelans don't recognize FBI. Venezuelans don't recognize any of this, right? It's different country, right? That also makes sense. But from American perspective, someone who literally damages USA with cartel and everything, US FBI actually putting out like, okay, he's a criminal on our list. Okay, here's a bounty. They can justify in that way. People can say it like, okay, as an international law, like, can you really do this? Can you really snatch somebody who's leading a country? Legal, like whether he won the election or not, he was leading the country. He was president, right? Whether he was legal or not. Can they do that? This is one big legality. Like, can a country snatch a president of another country? That's where the question comes from.
Now, legal experts are questioning the international law basis, and Reuters reported that Congress was not notified beforehand, at least according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So, is this about oil? Yes.
Wait a minute, I saw the DA, and that makes sense. It's about narcotics, right? So, Narcos TV show or movie, whatever. Was it a movie? I don't remember. But yeah, imagine the next installment of that. It's about this. What are we doing? It's about dangerous gang cartel? No, fuck it. Let's force Delta and like bring another country's president. That's the new movie of Narco.
But also no, at least not in the way people mean when they say it's about oil. When people say oil, they picture dancing. Venezuela's reserves and U.S. companies trying to get access. And sure, Trump has publicly commented that this is about energy stability.
We have tremendous energy in that country. It's very important that we protect it. We need that for ourselves. We need that for the world.
Too many people are focusing on that part of the speech and ignoring this part of the speech.
We want to surround ourselves with good neighbors. We want to surround ourselves with stability.
Removing Maduro from power has nothing to do with Venezuela and everything to do with China.
I mean, it has something to do with both. Obviously, Trump is focusing on oil. He's a businessman. He's going to think about money, right? This is why people voted him. Like, whether good or bad, he's going to say what it's about for him. Now, as a country as a whole, president is just one part. The whole mentality behind this might be China and like Monroe Doctrine, obviously. But obviously, Trump going to see as oil, so he's going to say that. That doesn't mean that's all it was about.
In Taiwan. The scarier oil story is about U.S. oil infrastructure. Texas alone accounts for about 43% of U.S. crude oil production and about 31% of U.S. refining capacity. And a lot of that refining and export and chemical infrastructure sits right on the Gulf Coast. So here's a question. What happens in a future crisis when a hostile power can hold the Gulf Coast at risk with a long-range precision strike? I think this conflict is really about China. And I'm going to say the quiet part out loud here. I don't think Washington did this because it woke up one day and decided it really cares about democracy in Caracas. And I don't think it was just about drugs either, although the indictment is very explicit about drugs. I think this is a hemispheric security move, and the strategic pacing threat behind it is China. China's competition with the U.S. isn't only in the South China Sea. It's about positioning, basing, dual-use infrastructure, and access, including access in Latin America. Reuters reported that China's CELAC, or Community of Latin American and Caribbean States trade...
Yeah, it's not about threatening China, because this doesn't really threaten China. US can do this with Venezuela, which is just there. Caracas was literally touching the ocean. You can do that with that. You can't really do that with China or any other big power. Result would be really bad. It's the sign like you can't just put your foothold where I live. Caracas and Venezuela was just there beyond the ocean, beyond Florida. You just basically there, ignoring few islands, sure. So US is basically sending message like, China, fucking enough. You're not going to put footholds where I live. This hemisphere, this part of the world is off limits.
Hit $551 billion in 2024. And a major development here is that Venezuela accounted for the largest share, about 44% of China's total development finance in the region since 2005. This was before Chinese policy banks stopped lending to Venezuela, which I think was in 2016. So Venezuela matters in the big game even when it's not in the headlines. Chinese missiles in Venezuela and why the Gulf Coast matters is kind of going to be the next subject here. Let me be very careful. I'm not saying that there are confirmed Chinese missiles units in Venezuela right now. What I am saying is if China ever got to basing bombers or missiles, ISR, intelligence surveillance reconnaissance, anything long range in Venezuela, that's close enough to be a real problem.
I think that's not the case, because if it were, China would be much more aggressive about this. Because China would have tried to remove that before US can get hold of that. US is kinda controlling Venezuela right now. You don't know what Trump's gonna do next. So China would panic if that's the case. I don't know.
Range rings, like from northern Venezuela to the Gulf Coast, we're talking about 3,300 kilometers from Houston. To the Panama Canal area, it's around 1,100 kilometers or so. That means that any future adversary with intermediate range capability could potentially threaten the Gulf Coast with its refineries and export terminals, shipping lanes in the Caribbean, and traffic near the Panama Canal. And that's where oil shows up again, because if you can choke Gulf Coast energy and shipping at the same time, you're not getting oil, you're turning off America's oil system. We've invaded people for less. Why did the U.S. invade Grenada in 1983 during Operation Urgent Fury? Yeah, I mean, it might have been to rescue some medical students, but really it was because Cuba was building an airfield on Grenada that could host Soviet bombers. Now, connect that scenario with everyone's plans.
There are two elements I want to talk about this. There is two ways. Soviet Union was different, Cold War was different compared to today's world. So one side of person could argue, yeah, China is not that level of threat, probably nothing's gonna happen. I would argue, same thing was said before Russia invaded Ukraine, before Middle East war started. Nothing happens until it happens. Do you really wanna get caught with your pants down? So China is not a threat. Until one day they just say, fuck it, it's now or never, I'm invading Taiwan. By the way, those missiles at Venezuela is going to strike USA. Fuck their oil. We're going to just choke off USA. Do you know how stupid that would make USA look? Being the world power, being the world police, so many bases, and getting caught with your pants down. That is the worst scenario for any country, let alone USA. So, if anything, the more I think about this, this could be much larger picture being worked here. This is a piece of the puzzle that is being laid out, right? And only top people in military can have this vision of what's happening at geopolitical level. We can just sit here and like speculate.
Around a Taiwan contingency. You don't want a Taiwan fight where at the same time you're also dealing with a Caribbean A2AD problem, or anti-access area denial, weapons.
What the
we need to be able to transit the Panama Canal safely. We need to be able to produce oil and gas and petroleum products on the Gulf Coast safely. So capturing Maduro wasn't actually phase one of the operation. It was actually phase two. Phase one had to deal with the Panama Canal and ports. Reuters reported that CK Hutchinson agreed to sell 90% of its stake in the Panama Ports Company. This is the company that runs the ports of Balboa on the Pacific and Cristobal on the Atlantic, to a consortium that includes BlackRock Capital. Reuters also noted that these ports were not the canal itself. I mean, the canal is operated by Panama. But what we don't want is...
What is BlackRock, man? It's being bring up a lot. There was conspiracy about BlackRock one day. What is BlackRock?
Or a Hong Kong-based Chinese holding company holding these ports. Now, as of mid to late 2025 reporting, the status of that deal is still not clean and final. In the event of a conflict with China over Taiwan, if China owns the ports on both sides of the canal, they can send a ship in there into the locks and scuttle it. And now, U.S. forces have to go the long way around the Pacific through the Straits of Magellan. Now let's talk about the Maduran.
What the fuck are you even talking about? This is not a joke, man. It's very hard to understand globe because people watch 2D maps and they get confused. This globe, still in 2D because we're watching a video, this doesn't really tell you the full picture. That is an insane amount. There you go, Antarctica literally touching that. Do you know when you get to the South America's edge, it literally, there's a board like you're getting the end of the world, because technically you are, Antarctica's just fucking there. This is not like South Africa where you have to go around. This is much lower. This is insanity.
To go the long way around the Pacific through the Straits of Magellan. Now let's talk about the Maduro indictment, because it's not just Maduro bad. The indictment alleges, kind of in plain language, more than 25 years of state corruption tied to large-scale cocaine.
For 25 years, leaders, not just him, but leaders of Venezuela abused their position, public trust, and corrupted one's legitimate institution to importance of,
trafficking. Maduro allegedly used official roles as the head of state to facilitate trafficking, including providing Venezuelan diplomatic passports to drug traffickers and using diplomatic cover for aircraft tied to money laundering. And it alleges that there's partnerships with major armed and criminal groups, including FARC, that's in Colombia, ELN, Sinaloa, the Zetas, and Tren de Aragua. Now, more importantly, it doesn't describe Maduro as a normal head of state. It describes him as the de facto and illegitimate leader who stayed in power despite disputed elections, and notes that many countries have refused to recognize him. So from Washington's perspective, that indictment is the paperwork that lets them say this wasn't an invasion, this was an arrest operation.
Again, in geopolitics, what is legal and what is moral? There is two ways you can go about it. You either have to be recognized by other countries to be a proper country or a leader, or you have to be powerful enough to defend your position. Maduro was not recognized. Neither was Maduro had like one of the top militaries in the world, top 5 militaries in the world. He didn't have that. If he had that, he could have just ruled with strong arm, like, fuck you, what you gonna do about it, type of way. There's only two ways to go about it. There is no morality, there is no nothing. This is geopolitics we talk about. When countries become that big, we're talking about like, even the international water, things starts to get like murky a bit.
The problem is that the U.S. messaging kind of blurred into, we're going to run the country.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So
that's indirect.
Which makes legal framing a little bit harder to defend. So what happens next? Is this a mistake of Rumsfeldian proportions? Will we see Iraq-style anarchy? I don't think so, and here's why. The Venezuelan security forces are primarily political patronage machines. A lot of militaries in the region are best understood as internal security forces or palace guard forces. Their primary job is regime survival, not ideological crusade. When regimes go away, the question becomes, well, who signs the paychecks, who controls the supply chain? Food is leverage, and Venezuela is dependent on a lot of food imports. This means whoever controls ports, hard currency, and shipping insurance.
Make it yourself is a big deal. There's a reason why most countries are like driving towards that, like make your own shit, even the military equipment. Because of this, Julius Caesar mentality, blockade, block off everything. That's how world become. That's how you show power. I'm gonna block you. You're gonna starve. What you gonna do next?
And also has a big stick, kind of runs the country. Third thing here is that this isn't Iraq with all of its competing factions and a minority who was in power and now out of power. And I mean, most of the war in Iraq was mostly a civil war with Sunni and Shia just kind of duking it out for control.
Yeah, even like let's not forget, like Iraq was like in a Iraq was on some military juggernaut, but Iraq's military was enough to invade other countries and shit like that. So that Iraq was different than Venezuela. It's not gonna be the same.
One of the dumbest things we did in Iraq was debathification. You see, in Iraq, if you wanted to be successful in your career, you had to join the Ba'ath Party. This was Saddam Hussein's political party. Then the U.S. rolled into Iraq and just fired everyone who was part of the Ba'ath Party. Thank you, Paul Bremer. And this leads to chaos because we fired all the technocrats who were only part of the Ba'ath Party because they just wanted a job. Now, yes, Venezuela does have militia forces. The easy way around that is just not fighting them. Hey, turn in your weapons, register your biometrics, you get temporary food aid, you get work placement, port security infrastructure.
Why did you say that with the middle finger?
Whatever. Is that guaranteed to work? No. Is it a plausible enough tool to just drain the swamp of small arms fast? Yeah, especially if basic calories are on the line. Turn in a gun, you go to the front of the line to get your ration card.
Again, another element I can think of, and I have to say this. USA is criticized a lot of time for like their abruptive, like, you know, like haphazard approach of doing things. They're like, what, this was crude, you could have done it better. Those people saying that you could have done it better. Yeah, but a lot of time when you just think about you could have done better, time passes, you do nothing. Inactivity is the biggest issue in the planet, right? Especially when you have problems, right? So I'm going to give props to US at this level. Yes, a lot of things are haphazard and people joke about it. But there is a scientific element behind it. Like you just do shit and figure it out later. And like when the problems appear, you put band-aids to it. At least something happens. Rather than just sit back and think about how to approach this better. Because geopolitics is extremely volatile and complex. You can't get the all elements in time. And time is the utmost factor. You can't just wait around, right? Sometimes you just have to do shit and figure it out later. At least results happen from that. At least something happened from that. You can see Iraq war as a failure, but at least you got the oil from that, right? I'm talking about like US perspective right now. Obviously, like Iraqis got screwed. There is that.
The biggest spoiler here isn't the army, it's armed networks. If the indictment's picture is even partially true, the armed ecosystem includes collectivos, corrupt security units, transnational criminals like Tren de Aragua. And these groups don't transition nicely, right? They fragment, they reband, they go freelance, they become armed gangs. They could be a problem in the same way that Panama's dignity battalions were a problem. I think in that case, you just kind of let Venezuelan police handle that. They'll be a little bit rougher than we will.
If they could have handled that, there wouldn't be a problem. What you talking about? I think this could be Afghanistan level shit where it doesn't matter how much US tries, you can't really contain this. I don't know.
But at least we'll have deniability on that one. There are strategic winners and losers here. Let's start with the winners. Venezuelans. This leads to a real transition of sustained humanitarian.
Kinda. Let's wait and see what happens. Because yes, Maduro's removed. Yay. What's going to be replaced? Usually power vacuums don't end well. US is mediating. Maybe that will make sure it ends well. Who knows?
Stabilization. Venezuela gets a shot at normal life again, a democracy. That's really the only win that matters in the long term.
Is this Washington?
I'm a big fan of democracy. U.S. energy and logistics systems are a winner, not because Venezuelan is oil, but because removing a hostile missile basing risk in the Caribbean reduces future strategic vulnerabilities near the Gulf Coast and key sea lanes. And since
Okay, again with the oil thing. Yes, Americans gonna get oil, but they're not just gonna fucking steal it. They are gonna give money to Venezuela when they acquire this oil. Maybe they'll get less money, but like without it, what money they could have gotten? Like US is a big market. If they extract oil from your country, money is gonna flow. That's kind of better, isn't it?
states are overwhelmed by migration. To stabilize Venezuela could reduce refugees and pressure over time in places like Colombia. So Colombia is a winner here. And as sad as it is to say, Russia is actually kind of a winner.
What?
But not in the way you think. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was kind of a thumb in the eye to the rules-based order of
The same thing I've been saying since the first reaction, where some people got pissed off because they didn't understand which geopolitical element I'm talking about. Yeah, Russia is a winner, obviously, because they have a perfect thing to say going forward. Shut the fuck up, USA, you have nothing to say, type of way.
nations. And as Ksenia Terekova reported, Russia has already used Maduro's extradition to justify its own war rhetoric against Ukraine.
This isn't about Venezuela. It's about Russia's need to normalize its own actions by saying everyone does this. The rules don't exist. Force is universal.
Yeah, it's
As in,
over.
like, see, we're not that different.
I've said that in the video, like it's over. Like USA can't use morality to preach to other countries like Russia, even to countries like India. Don't buy Russian oil, you're doing war machine. Even India can say, what the fuck was that Venezuela thing? You can answer that, but that answer won't matter because that's how these things go. Shut up, you can't say anything to anyone. That's how it's gonna go. So at that point, only thing USA has left is to use its power to strong arm people whenever they can. And if they can't, that's it.
But they are, right? The president of Ukraine was elected. The former president of Venezuela was voted out of power and just kind of refused to leave. So let's talk about losers. Maduro's inner circle, obviously, they might want to get on the next flight to Russia. Iran is a loser. Tehran was using Venezuela for influence and logistics. IRGC agents could go to Venezuela, grab a Venezuelan passport, travel all around the world. I believe Hezbollah was also in Venezuela doing training. I believe they were also combined with FARC doing
The
that
fuck?
training. China's a loser, at least strategically. Losing a friendly regime in the Caribbean is bad for Beijing's influence map, especially if a new government kind of pivots hard toward Washington, which they will. And again, even the possibility of future basing options just kind of disappears.
I think China is the biggest deal because China has been doing this in Africa, in Pakistan, even in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka literally touches India. That's how close Sri Lanka is. And China's like, fuck it, we're going to put base there. Okay, major powers are not a joke. China's just doing this. Of course, something was going to happen like this. This is just Trump's way of saying, like, fuck you, you're not putting foothold in, like, where I live. That's not going to happen.
Strategic loss. Cuba's a loser. They were heavily dependent on Iranian oil, and now that's gone. One of the reasons Cuban cigars are so crappy is that they're just throwing anything out the door they can for hard currency. And now that oil source is gone. So stuff to watch for in the next 72 hours. Number one is who controls Caracas from day to day. Maduro captured is really not the same as government collapsed.
Yeah, I think right now Vice President is doing it, but she's trying to cozy up to Trump, by the way. I saw the clips of that as well. I could share my Nobel Prize with Trump. First of all, that's not how Nobel Prizes work. It's the people who give Nobel Prize have to say it. You can't just share it with someone else. That's just weird to say.
Do Venezuelan units defect? Do they go inert? Do they just kind of disappear?
Inert, no.
Ports and airports.
Militia,
There's nothing to look
probably.
at. Who controls customs, food imports, and fuel distribution? Because there's a limited supply of food in Venezuela, and if no ship captains are willing to go to Venezuela to offload their cargo of food, you're going to see hunger really quick. Also look for a UN response and whether any government legitimacy framework kind of forms. And finally, look at oil export distribution, at least
Look for a UN. That Dave Chappelle skit about black bulls. That's how Trump's going to respond to UN.
temporarily. There will probably be a disruption in oil supply lines, especially since nobody knows what's going on. Like, hey, who do we get our inspections from? Who do we pay our taxes to? Whatever. if you want a one-sentence thesis, this wasn't about arresting a narco state leader. This was about removing a future strategic threat from the Caribbean while the U.S. stares down China in the Pacific. And if you don't plan for Taiwan...
Yeah, so this was a strategic thing, not a morality thing. Morality-wise, yeah, you can argue like U.S. literally just went to another country, snatched their leader. You can't really preach anything to Russia or China or anyone like that. If China attacks Taiwan, they're just going to point to Venezuela. Because morality-wise, if you take a step back, like what justification U.S. has, oh, I did it for my benefit, that's not really a justification. So legality and morality-wise, like, yeah, you can say like, oh, he was a drug leader, but in the end, he was in another country, leading another country. It's not the same thing. There's a reason why people have like political immunities when they go to another country. Shit like that.
And the Caribbean as a combined problem you're planning to lose. You want to know the good thing about all this? I've been embargoing Diplomatica rum because of Maduro.
What?
So, cheers to freedom, Venezuela. God, that's good rum.
Yeah, but go to region video page link, from there support this guy. Yeah, it was good information, right? There's a reason channel has 1 million subscriber. Yeah, there you go, freedom to Venezuela, as far as they can keep it, which is going to be the question in the future, how they're going to keep it. But yeah, alright, well, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. You'll be really helping out this channel, and I'll know which type of videos to react to more. Comment down if there is any specific video you want me to react to, and I'll see you next time.